I'm Sam Paskey. I am standing in, I'm usually here lurking, but I'm today standing in for Mark Maloney, who had a conflict and couldn't launch the meeting and do some of the officiating. So I'll do the very best I can. I won't measure up to his very capable leadership, but I can use it as a growth opportunity. We're always welcoming those. And then we're going to walk through the agenda here in a second. But before we do that, Ginger, I believe your upfront role to orient us to the uh, digital domain we're in right now, help us understand how to participate. I believe you are up to do that.
Sure. To conserve bandwidth, we ask all committee members and staff to put your microphones on mute and turn your video off during the presentation unless you are presenting or speaking, as well as close any oh, that got cut off, sorry. Close any other applications you might have running in the background that aren't associated with this meeting. The audio video tech will start the recording and share the presentations on screen. For members of the public listening to the session, use of the chat function will be reserved for committee members who are having technical difficulties, i.e. you cannot hear or we're unable to hear you speaking. Questions or comments from committee members can be asked by raising your hand. I will be watching for those raised hands and call on you as soon as there's a break in the conversation. See here. Make sure you speak directly into your microphone so we can hear you. And when you are speaking, please identify yourself by name first for anybody watching on video. If there are any votes, which we won't have any just for roll call, so forget about that, sorry. And record your responses by saying aye, nay, or, well, we're not abstaining because we're not voting, sorry. Are you ready for the roll call, Chair Paskey?
I
Acting Chair
am. What?
Paskey.
Yeah. Yeah, something pesky. I'm definitely ready. I believe I call to order this meeting of the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Technical Advisory Committee, also known as the TAC. And I'm also really grateful for all the members dedicating their time to this important set of meetings and the topic today. And Ginger, our recording secretary, will conduct the roll call now.
Great. We've heard from Mark Maloney that he won't be here. Scott Anderson.
Here.
Kristen Asher.
I'm here.
John Dustman.
Here.
Robert Ellis. Dale Folan.
I'm here.
Great. Crystal Ing. Lee In Rosania.
I'm here.
Matt Som.
Here.
Jim Stark. I believe he is at the Water Resources Conference today. Jamie Wallerstead has stepped down, and we have Gary Kruger filling in for her from the MPCA, as well as his colleague Liz Koffenberg. Forgive me if I butchered your name, I'm sorry. Bruce Westby. Jim Westerman.
Here.
And Ray Waulo.
All right. Thank you, Ginger. I will now read the executive order statement that authorizes this virtual meeting mode. Sorry, it takes a second, but we have to do it. COVID-19 has caused us to alter our meeting procedures, and the Met Council has determined that it is not practical or prudent to conduct in-person meetings due to the pandemic. The Met Council and its committees and advisory committees will conduct meetings in accordance with Minnesota statutes section 13D.021, and members will participate by phone or other electronic means. Given that it is not feasible for the public to attend these meetings in person, the council will permit pre-registered members of the public to comment during the public invitation portion of this virtual meeting, which I don't believe we have that aspect involved here. The public is encouraged to monitor this meeting remotely via our website and YouTube. Also, I don't know that those are extended to this one. And then the public may also submit comments to public.info@metc.state.mn.us, and we will respond promptly, as we do to all engagements with stakeholders and the public and the community. That agenda, which we'll do by consensus. And we're not going to do a roll call vote. So now is your chance. If you have any changes you'd like to add or concerns with it, just raise your hand or jump in via your microphone. And if there are no changes, we will move on and consider the agenda approved. I'll just pause for a sec just to allow you to complete that item if you do have something to mention. And nothing coming forward. I'm scanning the hands, by the way, but if I missed one, somebody please let me know.
I'm watching for them as well.
Okay, thanks, Ginger. And we'll now talk about the August 17th meeting minutes. If anyone has any concerns or wants to offer a revision or interpretation of anything in the minutes, please jump in now. No comments coming, then we will consider them approved. Wasn't aware of that. Okay, so we won't be using the chat, but you can jump in, just raise your hand and we'll acknowledge you and make a moment for you to raise a point. I'll also mention that we will try to call on you to share ideas, your questions, your comments, your thoughts, and we want to make a space for everyone to speak. This is an opportunity to participate, to raise our own thinking and help us all learn the issues and the things that make us strong together in the region, and help the legislature also understand what we need to have a vibrant and thriving Twin Cities region from an infrastructure perspective in this particular meeting. So Emily Steinweg will take us to that discussion. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you. Greg, can you please pull up the recommendations infrastructure PowerPoint? Great, thank you. Thank you all for attending today and prioritizing this meeting over the Water Resources Conference. We really appreciate it and look forward to hearing your input on this. So we are at our fourth and final topic-specific TAC meeting of the year on the topic of infrastructure. Next slide. So again, I'd like to call out the resources that have been shared by committee members related to our topic today. The resources fall into the topics listed on the screen and are found in the draft recommendations document that you received prior to today's meeting. Next slide, please. Today, you are being asked to share information for Mossack to consider at their next meeting related to potential recommendations in the area of infrastructure. So we'll take the same approach as we have in the past. We'll introduce the first draft of recommendations for Mossack that describes the problem or challenge, a high-level goal, and some recommendations for actions to achieve that goal. This current draft is based on past committee and water supply stakeholder conversations, as well as individual interviews held with Mossack and TAC members. And then we'll dive into a discussion on recommendations, but first you'll hear about a current project that is being done by the Met Council, guided by TAC related to infrastructure, and then hear from your TAC colleagues about their experiences and thoughts on infrastructure in their area. And we'll do a group exercise in Mural to review and revise the draft problem statements and actions. And that is a chance for you to share your thoughts and perspectives on the recommended actions, as well as propose others we may have missed. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. Next slide, please. So again, the information you share today provides a foundation for MAWSAC's work, in turn shaping the thinking and work at Metropolitan Council and its various areas of impact and decision makers like the legislature and other state agencies. Next slide, please. Today, we are discussing how we can improve understanding of the status of water supply infrastructure in the region. So again, this draft recommendations document was developed by staff and considers past committee meeting discussions, interviews with TAC and MOSSAC members, and internal MCES conversations. So this one's a bit wordy, and I will give you a few moments to skim the draft recommendations. All right, next slide, please. And the previous slide and this slide will go into more detail during the mural exercise, but I just wanted to highlight some examples of what might be discussed, and that could be the need and importance of educating, understanding views on the value of water and water infrastructure, the status of emergency water supply across the region, considerations of life cycles of water supply infrastructure planning with land use planning, and increased support for climate resilient infrastructure. So again, these are the same solutions that have been provided in the memo that was sent prior to today. Next slide, please. I wanted to share this slide to provide more reasons and support to look at the sustainability of infrastructure and how the region will develop and change. So this slide shares updated forecast information presented to the council this summer, assembled by the Research and Data Department here at Metropolitan Council. So the population in the Twin Cities metro area is predicted to reach 4 million in 2050, an increase of 1 million people from today, and it's not showing any signs of slowing down. If we use a conservative estimate of water use of 100 gallons per person per day, the region might need to supply an additional 10 million gallons per day. To do that, we need an adequate, plentiful water source, treatment facilities, and distribution systems. So just some facts to keep that in mind as we continue our discussion on water supply infrastructure. Next slide, please. All right, so I am presenting today on behalf of Rob Isabel with CDM Smith, a project that he and I have started from the questions and concerns raised by TAC members over the years. I'll give a project overview and share some preliminary observations of phase 1 of the Drinking Water Security and Resiliency Study. Next slide, please. So this project came from questions brought up by TAC about water supply security and resiliency. And the questions that have guided this project that have been raised over the years related to the collaboration or partnerships for safe interconnections, backup water supplies, the interconnections' possible effects on the amount and quality of water available, and interconnection studies and emergency agreements. Next slide, please. So the last time something similar was investigated by Met Council was back in 2007, where the study only looked at the physical interconnections. This map is one of the outputs from that work. The analysis tabulated data that was supplied by communities and the local water supply plans and identified where physical interconnections existed and which way the flows went. Next slide, please. So again, I'm sure a lot has changed since 2007. So it was time to update the analysis and get an updated picture about the status of emergency water supplies. So the project's goal is to develop resources that assist water supply systems in making sound decisions regarding growth, infrastructure planning, and water shortage mitigation, with an emphasis on the security and resiliency of their system to meet customer demands. Next slide, please. So with this project, our hope is to better understand public water supplier experiences, concerns, struggles, and issues in providing water now and into the future. For gaps, if any, in ensuring a safe water supply, the Metropolitan Council will consider how it can use its resources to fill those gaps. So as in the past, Met Council resources could look like technical support, research, funding, tools and programs, advocacy, and collaboration assistance. Next slide. So phase one is fairly straightforward. We began with data collection and analyzed local water supply plans, comprehensive plans, and reviewed resources on security and resiliency from trusted organizations like the EPA, AWWA, and APWA. Next, we held 2 small group sessions to hear from public water suppliers. A high level of topics discussed included water supply, any treatment concerns they have, whether it's aging infrastructure, contamination, distribution system status, security, both physical and cyber, backup power, climate resiliency, public perception of water, staffing resiliency, and other topics that came up in discussion. So phase one will wrap up with a report of the findings from the data analysis and small group work sessions, and will include next steps. Next slide, please. So we have finished both of these small group work sessions. In addition to the communities on the slide, St. Paul Regional Water Service also participated in the session. So more to come on the results in the final report, but one of the bigger concerns shared by multiple public water suppliers was staffing resiliency. We weren't really expecting to hear that as a major concern, but we did hear that it's challenging to find and keep trained water operators or find those who are newer to their career to train up in water supply and public works. And another challenge is the increasing number of retirements in the industry. So we are very excited to share the results of phase one and thankful to the TAC members who helped shape the project and provide input. Next slide, please. All right, moving right along, we are doing our local perspectives portion a little different today. As many of you TAC members are involved in infrastructure, I'd like to have this time be a place to hear from you and hear from each other about any challenges, concerns, thoughts on the status of infrastructure in the Metro. This will be an open discussion, so I'd love to hear your experiences. I did send a couple questions ahead of time if you recall that email. So I will give a refresh of what those questions are, or you can answer kind of your opinion and view of infrastructure with the questions on the screen. So this will be a open discussion, so you can either jump in, raise your hand, and I could use some help with moderating hands. And we just want to hear what you're thinking about and what some concerns are. So the questions I had emailed are, what current and future infrastructure challenges is your utility thinking about? What has your utility done or hopes to do to increase consumer confidence? How has your utility managed infrastructure planning with land use and development planning? And then how can the council and or organizations represented on TAC help? Great, thank you. So if anyone is feeling brave and wants to start the discussion, please go ahead.
All right, I'm feeling brave. This is Jim Westerman from the city of Woodbury. You mentioned current and future infrastructure issues. I will fully admit this is a little bit biased to the city of Woodbury, but I do think it probably extends out to our adjacent communities or communities in our general neighborhood. With the all-encompassing PFAS issue here on the east side of the metropolitan area, we've done some great things, but when it comes to infrastructure, the city of Woodbury has been handed a challenge from the perspective that the state has come out with an awesome plan that we are excited to implement. But it does pose problems for our community specific on infrastructure, where we're going to have a 2 water quality system at this point, and to tackle that issue, there are some huge infrastructure decisions that we're going to have to make as a community. And one of the questions or items you had on the last slide, or second to last slide, there was the funding mechanisms behind it. We are talking in the neighborhoods of many of tens of millions of dollars to close this two-system water quality system scenario that we're looking at, and how that all fits in with water equity in our community. So just some general context or feedbacks to start the conversation, but that's one issue that we're looking at, that with these emerging contaminants of concern, there's some massive infrastructure needs, not just in Woodbury, but many communities, and that's going to be, is today, and it's going to be more of a challenge as we go forward.
I'll go ahead and jump in. This is Gary Krieger again. I'll just follow up with what Jim said. And again, I'm with the MPCA, of course, in our remediation division, heading up our East Metro unit and dealing with the East Metro PFAS issue. Jim mentioned, we just completed finalization of our drinking water supply plan for the East Metro related to, dealing with PFAS in East Metro, both the quantity and quality. And yeah, as Jim said, coming up with a plan for, incorporating treatment systems into the cities, the various cities like Woodbury and Cottage Grove, large treatment facilities that will treat almost all their wells, but maybe not quite all of them. And as Jim said, try and incorporate this large infrastructure treatment system, project into their existing structure, so to speak. So I think that's where I'm coming into this group as, dealing with these emerging contaminants, and I'm sure that's could be an issue in not just East Metro, but other areas. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, thank you both. And another interesting question is, the East Metro's had a lot of support from MPCA and settlement funds to make these changes. So yeah, question is Jim, you had brought up water equity. I can see that happening in a lot of regions with either CECs, PFAS, and just how that'll get paid for, how they'll find funding for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to take a second and highlight that you're spot on. I think the East Metro has been very fortunate with what the former Attorney General was able to accomplish in the funding mechanism for the East Metro. Unique circumstance for sure, but on that challenge, and I think I do speak for probably a half dozen communities here, is that covers part of it. And in many ways, it's forcing us into other large infrastructure cost implications that otherwise we wouldn't be challenged with. So while we do have monies here to do some things, it's forcing us into a parallel expenditure to close that equity gap. And I think in the grand scheme of things here in the Metro anyways, is there might be a little bit of, well, the East Metro's got X hundred millions of dollars to deal with their issues out there, which is true. But there are parallel things with that we're being challenged with. It's forcing us into additional capital expenditures that we otherwise wouldn't need to take on, and gets masked by you got your cookie, now let us get ours. And it's going to be an interesting conversation as this all plays out.
Well, Jim, I think I agree with you on that point about, the East Metro got a nice large settlement to put towards drinking water issues, but it doesn't cover everything. So I don't want to have, like other areas might say, well, East Metro is all taken care of, don't worry about them. That's not necessarily the case.
This is Lynn Resania from Department of Health. So I'm going to mention about something that could be a big challenge to some metro utilities. That is the revision of the lead and copper rule. And currently, we are looking into, still the final rule is not out yet, but we are anticipating it to be kind of finalized sometime, maybe probably end of this year. But in this rule, there is still possibility, very likely now. Initially, EPA proposed to look at the action level versus a trigger level. And then so the second round could be likely to have the scenario of lowering the action level. That means utility go through the testing and then with a certain number of required location. And then this revision is going to focus on lead service line. So means that the water system need to come up with a new monitoring plan. If they have lead service line, it will be the taking priority to sample those locations. And then if the 90 percentile of the result exceed, previously was 15, now we're looking at 10. So we project they are likely to have more water system going to have an exceedance. And then that in that case, that means it's either corrosion control treatment optimization, or lead service line replacement. And that replacement portion is what I think is going to impact most, because it's going to be so expensive. And then we are also talk about ownership versus that, for example, Minneapolis doesn't own the service line, and then so it belongs to the private side. But then when you go down to New Hope, the other consecutive system, I don't know whether they own those line or not. So yeah, it is a very tricky situation that we have all kind of scenario, but then it is kind of pending on what is the final rule come out. But lead service line replacement, full replacement is what EPA is pursuing to just take that lead out. So that will be definitely a challenge in the next few years. Another part about the water quality could be a little bit more phosphate that is going to go into the water, wastewater stream. But that part, I think we have a good discussion for 3 decades now. So I think we kind of anticipate we can kind of manage the impact on phosphorus load. But what I'm really concerned is that funding for lead service line replacement and ownership issues. So
Committee member Anderson has his hand up.
you have a question?
Can you hear me all right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. I would like to echo what Leanne stated, particularly with regard, whether it's contaminants of emerging concern or changes in, the ability to detect some of the contaminants, kind of change, and then ultimately changing action levels and things that would have an impact on our treatment systems, right? So whether it's PFAS or just different standards that can suddenly or could suddenly alter a supplier's ability to meet a new requirement, or ultimately radically changing their method of treatment. Kind of time, the other two pieces that I think I'm just echoing and everybody is looking at, the aging infrastructure issue, and the cybersecurity resilience piece, funding for those. Also working on another group with some of the same folks here on wellhead and water supply protection, particularly as those drinking water supply management areas may cross municipal boundaries, and how do you practically implement protection measures in areas where you have zero jurisdictional control, and I think And as the discussions in that group have gone on, I think people are generally in agreement that communities and jurisdictions have worked fairly well cooperatively, but there isn't, you know, there isn't kind of an official or a regional approach to that, and there's also a big gap with regard to where the controls are. So where from a water supply perspective, there's an issue. We have little to no ability to, when it comes to land use controls in our own city, much less another jurisdiction. And then lastly, an area of equity and rate affordability. So as we look for additional funding, whether again it's for aging infrastructure or treatment changes to address a new contaminant, or wellhead protection, I mean that money has to come from somewhere, and traditionally that's rates, and then we're beginning to take a harder look at the just water affordability on a customer scale, and how do we balance that out? I guess, lastly, there's probably something to be discussed with regard to, the drought this summer and different differing water use restrictions in different communities, with regard to different sources again, and just trying to really get at, we implemented restrictions consistent with our water supply plan, yet I'm not sure that we necessarily saw the results that would have been desired, and so just kind of what's missing there, and what's the reality in trying to address a situation like that. It's not, it's probably not odd even watering. It's probably more like no outdoor watering, or something like, how do we have those harder discussions if the goal really is to get reduced demand in a situation like we had this summer, and then understanding even a bigger picture, is that the right reaction to what was going on this summer versus having a longer vision of instead of looking at what's going on in the months of June, July, and August in 2021 versus what has been going on over the last 10 years, and the implications of doing things like that. So kind of a lot of rambling probably. It looked like you were typing, Emily, so hopefully you got something worthwhile out of that.
Yes, I did. Thank you. You bring up a lot of really good points, and just shows the scale of this question and this issue, and how we can continue to provide safe water with changing regulations and climate. I have a question too to add to this discussion. So let's see. Okay, any recommendations for communities, from communities with newer water systems, say, okay, wait, I'm butchering this. Okay. Is there anything that communities that have newer water systems, anything they can do to avoid infrastructure challenges when the systems reach 100 years old or so? So like Minneapolis and St. Paul with the very old systems. Is there any advice for longevity for the newer systems? If you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in on that or any of the other discussion questions. Yeah, longevity is going to be a very important question, and just regular maintenance on top of maybe a new treatment system due to a CEC. So if there's any advice for newer systems, I'm sure that would be well received.
Raising my hand here. This is Dale Folan from Minneapolis. the one representing the 100-year-old system.
Thanks.
We we're always thinking of the next treatment project after the current treatment project. So we're renovating our 1920s filter plant, and at the same time, we're considering contaminants of emerging concern as a possibility into the future. And so we're looking at the next opportunity as potentially ozone as a to remove some of those contaminants of emerging concern. We haven't gone very far down that path, but we're at least making sure our options stay open so that we are leaving space on the campus and things like that. So that's one idea. And otherwise, it's a matter of keeping kind of a holistic approach to looking at your infrastructure. We sometimes we've had how do I say this? Some management at Minneapolis was maybe very focused on one particular aspect of the utility and it didn't really focus on the broader picture of how many other things were going bad, or not bad, but starting to wear out. So keep a wide view of all from the supply all the way to the distribution system. You need to keep a good balance of maintenance going on and renewals going on through the whole system.
So we have about 3 minutes left if anyone has last thoughts they wanted to share. And if not, we can move on to the mural exercise. But Lanya, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, in the spirit of advice, I was curious if those communities who have been hit by emerging contamination or a changing regulation and having to scramble to think about how to change plans, if you have any suggestions for, it would have been really nice to have had this information or to have had access to this expert, or, you know, if you have any suggestions for what we could maybe put in place for those people who haven't been hit, that'd be great.
This is Jim from the city of Woodbury. We've been fortunate to have great partners in our scramble, which is a continuous scramble. Right now, we've been doing it for 3 years, responding to contamination. I think what it really would streamline things and help is to ask that everybody is asking, to have some sort of established funding to respond to these issues. East Metro has been very fortunate to have some money available and MPCA supporting those communities. But even then, as Gary on the meeting will attest to, it was a struggle at times to get that money released in a fashion that allowed a community to respond effectively. Made it harder. So I can only imagine for a community that's dealing with something else, doesn't have funding, whether it's nitrate contamination or something like that, that makes it nearly impossible to respond effectively and timely to something.
Thanks for that, Jim.
Hi, this is Kristen. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but from Richfield, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the asset management piece and the understanding the assets that people have, because I think we're all operating with original systems, and the world in general and all of our elected officials at the Capitol assume that everything's just hunky-dory and that, you know, the water's going to flow and no concerns are there. But, you know, I think there's a really big issue, at least in my role and the people that I talk to around the state, that there's a inconsistency on what people know about the systems that they're operating, even what they have, let alone the condition. And there's an assumption that everything's great, I think. from the vast majority of people, the vast majority. So I think that's just kind of hanging out there, and people aren't talking about it. And I don't think it's a priority, and it should be. And I don't know how you can help us, but that's just my 2 cents. And we're doing a lot in Richfield trying to wrap our minds around. I mean, we know where our infrastructure is, and we have a really good feel about the condition that it's in, and we're actively doing condition assessments and visuals, and we're doing testing to see, you know, the thickness of our walls on our water main, and we're doing some lining now that we just started doing for the first time last couple of years. So reinvestment is key. By having a plan so you're not spending money that doesn't need to be spent. Don't line a pipe that doesn't need it. And how do you do that? And how do you tell a story to maybe the legislature when it's not holistic across the state, even not even in the metro? I mean, it's kind of almost just like a giant question mark out there, but everybody's assuming it's good because nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, thank you. That is a good point to bring up. Out of sight, out of mind, right, for a lot of our utility infrastructure. This has been great. I'm really excited about this discussion, and I think we can transition to Mural now, and this will be a place, again, to keep sharing these perspectives and thoughts, and maybe we can get some encouragement on a couple of our recommendations or strong push. So, Lanya, if you'd like to start Mural, and Greg, we have the Mural PowerPoint you can pull up quickly.
Yeah. So is my sound working?
Yes.
Right. I will warn you all, I have a little bit of an interconnection or a connection problem, so I apologize if I cut out on you. I know some of you are very familiar and are getting comfortable with Mural, and I know that for some of you it's a little stress-inducing. So I'm just going to walk really quickly through the PowerPoint presentation for this exercise, just to get everybody up to speed. If you're not using Mural, feel free to look at the document of all the more detailed recommendations, because that's what we're interested in getting your input on. So next slide. For those of you who still want to learn more about Mural, we do have a link in the presentation for some tutorials. Next slide. But the TAC members should have gotten an email earlier today with a link to a Mural website. It will look something like this. And just as a quick reminder, if you haven't used this before, you'll get the link to the website. Feel free to go into that right now if you want. You can kind of click and drag is an easy way to move around the space. Using Control+ or Control- also zooms you in and zooms you back out. And then we are going to be asking you to contribute some ideas, and you can do that by just double clicking on any of the little sticky notes that you see. So double clicking will work, or if you double click in the white space, you might automatically pop up a new sticky note. Feel free to add your comments in there. We'll be moving through this web page, so you can either, as I said, click and drag, but if you'd prefer, you can hover over the LR icon that you'll see down on the lower middle part of the web page. And if you right click, you should be able to follow me. And if you prefer, when you open this, you may see an outline box pop up on the right side of the application. And if you click on some of the steps there, it will zoom you to different parts. So that's the space we're going to be working in. Again, you don't have to use this. Just feel free to raise your hand. I know Emily and Ginger will be looking for raised hands, and you can contribute verbally, and we will add those comments to the board and capture them in the notes. For those of you who are not in the TAC meeting, you're just watching online, this is not great. It's kind of like watching small group discussion. You don't get to see the details, but all the comments will be shared in the minutes for this meeting, so you won't miss any content. Next slide. All right, so the first thing that we will do is give you a little bit of time to read the draft problem statement and read the goal. And then I will be asking your level of support This is just a really quick poll. So I'll be asking on a scale of 8, you love it, down to 1, no, 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 you want to block it, how strong your support for the problem statement is. And then, next slide. We'll be asking for your thoughts on how we could make your support stronger. How might you reword things? Maybe you feel that the problem statement or the goal is missing something and we should be adding it. I've always appreciated your suggestions for how to use plainer language just to make it clearer. So any suggestions you have are what we're interested in collecting from you. Next slide. And then we're going to spend some time sharing some of the actions or solutions that we've heard in past meetings. And so getting your thoughts about how you might rearrange them or prioritize them based on how easy they might be to implement or what the impact might be. And also, I'm sure you will notice things that you think should be either taken out or added. So we really want some brainstorming there as well. So we'll spend some time doing that. And again, if you're looking at the actions on pages 2 and 3 of that memo, that recommendation document, I'm really curious from your perspective, your expertise, what are we missing? What do you think would make the biggest or the most long-term impact? Or alternatively, what do you think is something that we could be easily implementing now? So, next slide. And then finally, I hope we have time at the end to think about what we could start doing now. So if you have an example of an existing effort that we could use as a model, something we could expand on or use to start something similar, those ideas are very welcome. And also any of your thoughts about who might be some really influential leaders for work in this area of infrastructure. So for example, we heard this value of creating more funding for emerging contamination as one area. Who might be good leaders and influential voices in that work? And then what expectations would you have for those people as we start to think about doing that work? So that's where I'd like us to end. Next slide. Oh, good. So we're done. You guys ready to dive into this? All right, I'm going to take a moment to share my screen if this works. That's not what I meant to do at all. I am learning new things. Give me a moment here. My computer is backing up. You guys are all going into the Mural board, or you are looking at the, I see several of you are in there, or you're looking at the recommendations document. So, starting to look at this, if you are in there, would you spend a couple of minutes reading the problem statement? And in about a minute, I am going to ask you to vote. So for those of you off in the ether, can you see my screen? Emily, do you have a?
Yep, I can see it.
All right. Is it somewhat legible?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And reminder, in WebEx, you can zoom in. I see it on the left-hand side of my WebEx window, and that helps with visibility.
Excellent. So, support for the problem statement. Consider the words. I'm going to turn off the cursors so you're not getting in each other's way on my screen. I'm going to give you 30 seconds and then I'm going to have us vote. All right. When I ask you to vote, you'll be able to put a little sticky dot. It'll be very tiny. But I'm going to give everybody a sticky dot and you can put it on the number 8 if you love this problem statement and the goal, all the way down to 1. You veto this proposal and anywhere in between. Right, you now have a sticky dot. You can vote. Try to keep it on the numbers. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A couple of you are still thinking. Wait. Five seconds. 1. All right. So in terms of results, we're seeing agreeing with some reservations, a couple down at 2, which would be some disagreement. You're not going to block it, but you're not keen on it. Some support it really strongly. You have an I like it. So hearing that there's some concern with it, would whoever voted for that or anybody who agrees share that? Or what's kind of the sticking point for you? We want to make this strong goal and problem statement.
This is Dale Fullen poking my nose in.
Yeah.
The phrase of falling consumer confidence bothers me. I think there's better ways to to say it than that.
I agree. This is Scott. I had that phrase, and I think I voted on the 6. Agree with reservations. I mean, generally agree with the problem statement, but I think that falling consumer confidence raised a flag with me as well, and particularly, yeah, just kind of that, falling consumer confidence make it harder to get support for water supply infrastructure investment. May or may not be tied together, but again, I mean, the presumption of consumer confidence falling. In addition, signal, kind of separating out utilities with small customer base struggling to maintain or enhance infrastructure. I don't know that it's limited to small utilities or small customer bases, and would maybe add not only small customer bases, but simply, demand in general makes it challenging to meet those infrastructure investments. I mean, prior to this year, we could show significant, steadily declining demand over the last, 8 or 10 years, and that has a real impact on revenue, which affects our ability to enhance infrastructure or implement something new without raising rates. And so That's my comment.
It's
I
Jim.
appreciate that. Yeah.
I'm just gonna poke my nose in here too. I'm struggling with the first sentence of the first paragraph. I just think that needs to be reworded. I'm presumptuous to say that it's ongoing sustainability. There's many parts of municipal water otherwise that are not sustained. So I just struggling with the wordiness of the first sentence.
So, yeah, no, this is really helpful. And I see somebody is in kind of adding some comments. So I'd like to encourage that. I added some Post-it notes to this mural board, and feel free to go and double click on my comments and add to them or revise them, or add your own. I'm going to have us move into the second activity here. So for those of you who are following along, I'm now under the mural board heading, what would make your support stronger? So I'm going to give you a minute or so to share additional suggestions. What would you change to strengthen your support for that problem statement or the goal? If there's any challenge or way of describing the challenge that we missed, feel free to add that. If you have sort of a clear vision, like here's how I'd like things to be for infrastructure in our region, and you want to share those comments, I would welcome that. If you have suggestions to just reword, don't use this word, use this other word instead, that would be something we can put here. And so for those of you who are in the mural board, feel free to double click on any of these orange stickies and add your comments. We'll go with, let's give this 2 minutes. I'm starting a timer for us. And then I'll ask if you to look at the comments that get shared, and we can see if there's any that we particularly want to highlight. Alternatively, if you prefer to share by voice, continue to add comments and I will capture them in the sticky notes, and Emily can as well. Appreciate the comments about water affordability. And thank you for whoever suggested rewording to define the problem first, aging infrastructure and contamination. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share by voice? All right. See a couple more comments, so I'll let you finish up. Something about education. Does anybody want to call out or second or highlight anything that was shared? I can't wait till we all meet in person again and I can see you all face to face. I just have to say that. You are all, for leaning into this with us. I really appreciate trying this new technology, but we'll get face to face at some point. All right. Well, thank you for that. That is helpful. And Emily and I will take those comments as we think about drafting this report for MOSSAC. Maybe the fun part of this activity will be in thinking about potential actions. Can you guys still see this screen? For those of you who are in here, hopefully you can see all of these different activities. If you are not interested in working on the mural board, these are the list of activities that were included in the recommendation document. So they're just a slightly abbreviated version of that, but you can see that there were some financial related actions in purple, some outreach and engagement suggestions in orange, research related activities in the light blue, and dark blue may be suggestions more related to regional policy development. In our conversations, Emily and I didn't hear a lot of regulatory actions in what we had used to draft the recommendations, but if you have some suggestions, please feel free to add them. The question is, as we think about actions or solutions we could take to address the challenge of water supply infrastructure, what are those actions? And do you think that they're relatively easy to implement? If so, move those actions or add a new action to the top half of this rectangular box. If you think that they might be harder to implement, feel free to grab these and move them down. If you think that it's something that's going to give us a sort of immediate or maybe more of a short-term impact, put it on the left side of this box. If you think it's going to be a really big or maybe a longer-term impact, move it to the right. Does that make sense? And I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to read. Feel free to zoom in, rearrange, move things. If you double click on the white space, you should add a new post-it so you can add new content. And for anyone who is more interested in having a conversation about actions, again, I would ask, as you think about the conversation that we had after Emily's presentation and in your own experiences, if there is something that you see as like, this is the low-hanging fruit we can do now, and you want to call that out, we'll make sure that that is in this group. Or if there's sort of the moonshot, if we could do this, that would really set us up. We want to make sure that is on here too. And Emily and Ginger, I can't see raised hands, so I'll rely on you to check that.
John Dustman has his hand up.
Great.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
I guess this is a question for you, Lanya, or I guess anybody that's familiar with the database. That map that you showed earlier with the interconnections, do you have the access database that went into making that?
I do. That was when I very first started working for the Met Council. And I can, I believe, still remember where that has been filed.
Well, maybe in a separate, maybe offline, Lanya, you and I could just do a go-to meeting or a WebEx, and we're the ones that did that. We've created a website. We gave user logins and passwords to all the utility managers, and if it's not the same database, I actually went and found it in our files, and it's pretty robust. And so I'm the one that added the assets because it's way more than interconnection.
Yes.
We have wells, depths. We have a really, it was a pretty comprehensive. Unfortunately, at the time, the governor wanted to move up the report, the annual report, by like 4 months. And so I think we only had about 60% of the metro area cities that actually participated. But if that's something that could be revived, I mean, the infrastructure is there to do it again.
Thank you for reminding me of that. That project had started right before I joined the council, and let's get together. And Emily too, you might be interested in digging into that.
Yeah, it's kind of neat because it can be hooked up relatively easily to a GIS, and therefore you can visualize way more than just the existing connections. You can really ask the database a lot of questions and then visualize it in ArcGIS.
Can I add something to that when you guys look into that a little bit? Is a physical connection or a well or whatever the infrastructure, whatever the asset is, that's one piece. There's a kind of a bigger piece that is that however that connection, those connections came to be. There's a real question, I think, after the fact. Is that feasible? Jim brought up a good point. I mean, he's dealing internally with some very different water quality parameters within his own system. And so a physical interconnection, it's one thing that it exists, but particularly if they're old, the history may not be around, how do they even work? What are the pressure implications? What are the water quality implications to utilizing something like that? What agreements have to be in place to utilize something like that, and under what conditions? And so kind of needing to understand what even what the goal of each particular interconnection is, I think is all. And maybe that some of that information's in that database. I don't know, but to me, I mean, I know of some interconnects that, I mean, frankly, I think we'd be better off eliminating than trying to maintain, just because they're not really practical between the two systems any longer. If they ever were, I don't know.
It's a good point.
Yeah, great comments, Scott. That we do have a couple interconnects with communities, and frankly, it was a team of us that discovered them about 7 years ago. So I mean, just from the very rudimentary level with staff turnover and aging expertise, I got to tell you, we didn't even know we had them until we embarked on the process based on the staff that was available. And then additions really touched on it. How do we use it? Who knew how to use it? Who knew who was responsible to use it? We didn't want to turn the valves on and flush the interconnect line because we didn't know who was responsible for them touching another community's infrastructure. So we embarked on a long process to identify past agreements, lack of agreements, and get into the water quality issues. So there's a lot of others underlying concerns with interconnects. Just building off what you were saying, Scott, some good points.
Dale Folan has his hand up. He's had it up for a while, and then John Dustman's hand is still up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on John's, of all of that data being all in one place. My first question is that secure? Now that all this issue of cybersecurity and bad actors are out there. So you'll hear me repeat this phrase often, but that's what I just want to make a reminder of that. So
Thank you for that. Yeah. So as you've all been looking at this, I've been seeing a couple of additions. Nobody's really moving things around, but I'm going to just do a quick, I don't know, I'm into voting today, but I'm going to give everybody 3 dots.
Ali's hand is up, Lanya.
Great, thank you, Ali.
Thank you. My comment is just that Scott and Jim brought really a very important point. I was in a meeting with a community about a couple of years ago, and that community for a while assumed that they have a connection with their neighbor, and all of a sudden they found out that their neighbor removed the pipes that had that interconnection, and they didn't inform them. So there is, again, the feasibility and actually the practicality of the connection is a very important topic that I think many of the communities need to make sure that it's working. And I think all the points that Jim and Scott mentioned today are really good points that I think for us, if we are looking into resiliency, that's the first place where we can start looking into some of these issues. Thank you very much for raising this point. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I just gave everybody 3 dots, and I'd be curious, as you looked over this list of actions that people have suggested, if you could put a dot on your 3 favorites, or 3 dots on your 1 favorite. For a second, I apologize. That makes sense. I see people are, I'm assuming, reading in detail. For those of you watching from afar, watching the number of people voting, and I can tell there's some very thoughtful decisions being made. I'm going to close it shortly because I assume that some of the people who got votes are me and Emily and Ginger, so not everybody will vote here. I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2. So we saw some votes for supporting programs that fund the cost of infrastructure asset renewal, which was right out of our conversation earlier. More votes around the interconnections. Consider how feasible physical interconnections are. That was one of our new comments. Investing in water sustainability and resiliency of systems. So again, that support for infrastructure. And for multi-community planning of infrastructure and source water. And number of single votes for a whole variety of things. Education and outreach show up, the database of the assets, exploring relationships between equity and socioeconomic factors. So that ties into some comments earlier. Guidance for regional agencies to support public water supplies to address the lead service lines and other infrastructure funding. Policies that acknowledge and address long-term impact on water supply infrastructure. Criteria for targeting state and regional support for water supply infrastructure. Equitable rate structure comes up again. So thank you so much for letting me put you on the spot for that. That's really helpful to see where your focus is. And so finally, I would like to, we're running a little behind, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I just wanted to end with an opportunity. If there is an action or an existing effort right now that you think is something we should be looking to as a model or something to expand, I invite you to share your thoughts about that very briefly. We'll just take a minute here. And also if there is somebody or an organization you see as a really crucial leader for work in this water supply infrastructure topic area, let's call that out here too, because we'll make sure that that's highlighted in the MAWSAC report. And again, if there's an example of an existing effort we could build on, that could be a case study that we highlight in that MAWSAC report and use to scope some future projects. You can add these in the Mural board, or if you want to just share audibly, that works as well. We saw, let's see. I'm going to ask, because the infrastructure funding is such a crucial and challenging part of this, who I think TAC and MOSSAC as an advisory committee have a strong voice, but who else would be a good voice to add to that request at the legislature?
This is Dale Folan from Minneapolis. I had a conversation this morning with Chad Colstead from the Health Department, who is the coordinator of the State Revolving Fund. And it sounds like a fair bit of money could be coming our way, our meaning we as the water industry. So that's a big and very great resource for all water utilities through the Health Department and the Public Facilities Authority.
This is Jim. I do apologize, hanging with one ear here, multitasking, but the League of Minnesota Cities, I think, is a great opportunity or a great area to see if there's an opportunity to advocate for municipalities and funding through either state, more likely state legislature process. Get the words out of my mouth. But then there's the whole other federal component that Dale is, I think, referring to as well.
I thought I saw a little flash. Emily or Ginger, is there another hand up?
No, Gary, sorry, Kruger said, I do need to sign off as I have another commitment. I'll follow up with Lanya about a TAC overview for myself and Liz.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for going through that mural exercise. This is the 4th time we've done it. It will be the last time this year. And so I want you all to pat yourselves on the back for being willing to work with this technology. From a staff standpoint, I have to say, while it's not ideal, it has been incredibly useful for us to get the kind of rich comments this way, in addition to what you've shared verbally. And so we really appreciate your being willing to try this out with us through this past year. So I guess leaning forward, if there's any lessons learned for as we think about 2022, what has worked and what would you change about how we've been doing this? We certainly will welcome that input either now or follow up with us after the meeting. So again, for those of you who are following along, all of these details will be compiled and we will include them in the minutes and use them to revise the recommendation document to share with Mossack at their next meeting. So you will have a chance to look at this all in detail. Thank you for that. Whew, that was a lot. And you're not done with me yet, because the next agenda item is a little bit more detail about the report that Mossack is going to be creating and sharing with the Metropolitan Council and with the legislature. And so if anybody has any last minute comments, I welcome those. Otherwise, we will move into that next presentation. Hearing none, we are now going to be looking at the draft MAWSAC report presentation. Next slide. So we've kind of been pounding on this message, but again, all of the content from these conversations over the past year are informing this report. And the primary audience is the Metropolitan Council and the Minnesota Legislature. And per our work plan, we started at the beginning of the year, we want to provide a set of recommendations and some supporting information around the high-level priority water supply topics we identified back in 2019 and 2020. And the goal being that policymakers and some influencers are going to be better informed to develop and implement policies that have a broader perspective. So hopefully we're achieving multiple benefits with what these policies become, reducing unintended impacts to water supplies. And as part of Minnesota Statute 473-1565, who governs our work, the council is statutorily required to consider MAWSAC's work and recommendations as it prepares its regional development framework. For those of you not familiar with that phrase, that's also known as the Metropolitan Development Guide and the related regional policies and system plans. So it's most recently known as Thrive MSP 2040 and the water resources and transportation, housing, etc. policy plans. So we're at this nice time where we could be really influential in a lot of that work. Next slide.
Lanya?
Yeah.
We have a message in the chat. I just want to read it out loud for anybody who might be watching. It was Jim Westerman. He said, my apologies. I'm right behind Gary and have to sign out to another commitment. Lanya, I sent you an email with some additional infrastructure information. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for all who are able to stay with us, because I'd like to get your input on what content this report should include. This MAWSAC report will build on the high-level report to the legislature in 2017. So if anybody is interested in a refresh, I did include the link to that, and that sets some high-level direction. Next slide. And I wanted to just recap the process. We started with some community interviews, if you recall, which set our work plan. We've been bringing topics to TAC for some discussion and review. We revise the content, sort of draft problem statement, recommendations, actions, bring it to MAWSAC for their consideration. And now we're starting to draft this report. And one thing that I am asking is for up to 3 TAC members who would be willing to volunteer their time for some more focused discussion about the content of that report. We want the recommendations going to the council and the legislature to be relevant, to be impactful, and to reflect the needs that the committees have identified. So sit with that for a moment. Once we draft that report, it will, of course, be reviewed by the full MAWSAC and TAC, the member agencies represented by those committees. We'd also like to bring that content to our water supply work groups to kind of let them know what the thinking is. And then it will be approved by MAWSAC and shared with the council and the legislature. So those are the steps. Next slide. So if you are more date oriented, we do have some proposed milestones. I think the important ones are our goal to have it approved by MAWSAC on January 18th and present to the council's environment committee and the council at the end of January and into February, and then submitted to the legislature mid-February. So that's the schedule we're working on. All of the information you've shared so far has been helpful in drafting that content. So we've been working behind the scenes, but we really need to kind of ramp it up and finalize it now. Next slide. All right. So far, what we are proposing as an outline for this report includes a section on how to use this report to inform policy. That was input we got from MOSSAC when we shared this outline with them at their last meeting. And we would, of course, have some background information. Who is MOSSAC? Why was the report created? How did these recommendations come to be? But the meat would really be in the goals and recommendations. So having some information about some of the regional challenges that are driving the focus for the recommendations, laying out some of the principles that are going to shape how the work should be done, wanting to advance sustainability, which is a core goal of the Master Water Supply Plan, also promoting equity, which is a need we've been hearing in several of these conversations. And then specifically, what should be done? We're hearing the recommendation to prioritize funding, collaboration, some technical assistance, and research in some key areas. So we'll be harvesting the content from these meetings to put some details in that. We also heard that there'll be value in including some local stories or examples of what this work can look like, and then providing supporting information. There may be some technical information, some maps, other data to help explain or justify or support the recommendations. So I would welcome your reactions to this proposed outline. Also, next slide. I am, as I mentioned, requesting 3 volunteers to do a little bit more work outside of this committee. We're estimating a time commitment of about 12 hours from this month through the end of the year. That may be 2 to 4 meetings, maybe fewer meetings, and some independent review time, providing input on some of the report messaging, specifically on some of the recommendations. I'm helping advise and assist the council staff to connect with groups or individuals who could provide content or review. And then also just to help us process and review and provide comments on the draft before it goes to MOSSAC for that final approval. So this would all be supported by Emily, me, and other council staff. But your perspective will really help make this stronger and make sure that the recommendations are going to be relevant. We will be sending out, I'm taking volunteers now, but if you want to think about it for a minute, we'll be sending out a reminder and a request after this meeting as well. Next slide. Any questions or suggestions? Or volunteers? We asked MOSSAC for volunteers as well. The chair, Wendy Wolf, expressed some interest. Phil Klein, who's on Mossack but also sits on our Land Use Advisory Committee, expressed interest, and we'll be reaching out for a couple others as well. I hear you all thinking. I guess I would be curious if there was one thing you think it's really important for the Met Council and for the legislature to keep in mind about the region's water supplies. What would it be for you? Continue to think about it. Feel free to send that.
Can you say that again?
Well, I'm just really curious, like, what do you think is important for regional planners, for legislators to keep top of mind when they're thinking about water supplies?
Do you want a discussion or do you want comments or how do you want this back?
We have a couple of minutes in the agenda, so if you have an idea you want to share now, we'll capture it. Or if you have opinions and you want to volunteer to help us with this, that works too.
I'll start with just my comments here, and I think it touches a little bit on what Kristen mentioned, and it's something that I've seen just locally with our council is it has taken a long time for them to fully grasp the dollar amount and the extent of the cost of infrastructure renewal. I think it's just not top of mind for very many people who aren't in it. And so you can talk about infrastructure renewal and water system infrastructure, and it's costly, and I think it's whether it's education to the legislature or lobbying or whatever it is, I really don't, it doesn't seem like it's sinking in just how the magnitude of what that looks like. And then secondarily, I think the what we've been exploring a little bit in the wellhead protection work group is the land use implications and kind of the conflicting goals of some of the things that are trying to be done from a land use perspective versus goals from a water supply perspective.
You can hear me typing there. Thank you for that. That ends the content that I committed to provide today. Thank you so much for your thoughtful input, and that will help us as we continue to draft this report. So you'll see this coming back to you. I really appreciate that. I will then turn it back over to Sam, and I think we're at the stage where if there's either an update or just an opportunity for committee perspectives.
Yep, I'm taking Sam's role now. And before we get to that, we have an update from Ali. So Ali, if you want to share for a couple minutes, that'd be great. And then we'll wrap up with committee perspectives.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to TAC today. I just have one update that I want you to be aware of it, and probably you might have seen some of it around. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has honored Met Council Environmental Services, the Water Supply Planning Group, with the 2021 Water Sense Excellence Award. This award recognizes our agency's dedication to helping consumers, stakeholders, and businesses save water. Despite the challenge and disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic, there is two collaborative programs. We got this excellence award for our collaboration efforts with the communities. So without the help that we get from you, without your participation in our programs, and without your help and guidance, we wouldn't get this this award. So this award really goes to all the communities in the metro area, not only the Met Council. So thank you for your help for us to make us look good. So the two programs that collaborative programs that housed in the Environmental Services Water Supply Planning Group that are recognized by this award are the Water Efficiency Grant Program that we have been running for the last 5 years. And this program, as some of the communities who are participants of that are in the meeting today, uses the WaterSense products or certification as a guidance for this program. So the EPA recognized us for being partners in using their system of certification that they put in place and implementing that through our grant program. The other program, and thank you for the 40 communities who have participated in this. This is all goes to you guys for embracing the concept of water saving and working with us in the grant program, and hopefully we'll continue providing the support that we have been providing to the communities by getting this money from the state to be distributed to communities in the metro area in the future. The second program is the turf grass irrigation efficiency project program that we have been working with the University of Minnesota Extension Services on for the last 8 years. And a lot of the products that came out of suggestion, the research that was done resulted in some direction that we received from the university that you could implement so and so. And a lot of the products that they suggested WaterSense, and that's why we have been recognized for this. So thank you again for all the communities who have been participating. Thanks for the TAC members, and thank you for the MAWSAC members for helping us really getting this prestigious award from the EPA. And that's it. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Ali. And there is more information on the Met Council website if you'd like to learn more about the award and the projects. So I would like to give the remaining committee members one last chance to share reflections on anything discussed today, whether it was the open discussion earlier or the mural activity, anything else you want the group to be aware of. So I will go down the list of remaining participants. So please share if you'd like, or if you have nothing to add, just pass or say nothing. So starting with Scott.
I think I'm okay for now.
Thank you. Dale?
Nothing to add.
Okay, John?
Nothing to add.
Kristen?
I'm good, thank you.
We had a really good discussion. Love this. Leanne?
Thing to add. Thank you.
Okay, and lastly, Liz. Did she just leave? Oh, she's there. Okay. Liz, did you have anything else you wanted to add or share with the group? Okay, so just a couple more minutes left. We should get out a little early. I just wanted to summarize our next steps so you know what is coming from us, because we have a lot going on in the next couple of months. Oh, thank you, Liz. I see your comment. Liz has nothing to add. So next steps, Lanya and I will begin drafting the report with now this meeting information, which is due in early 2022. We will work with our MAWSAC and TAC volunteers to finalize language and report content and message we want to communicate. So we are proposing a meeting on Tuesday, December 7th at 1 p.m. as a joint meeting with Mossack, TAC, and sub-regional work groups to go over the report. And we will provide a summary of the report at that event. And any input that we get at that event will be used to finalize the report. So then lastly, Mossack and TAC will meet on January 18th to approve the final draft that we will then share with the legislature and the council. So that is all we have. So I have a bug flying around. Watch your inboxes for emails from us. If you have anything else that comes to mind related to the meeting topic today, feel free to email Lanya and myself. And if you are willing to volunteer to be on the kind of report review team, please let us know and we will get you the information. So Lanya, do you have anything else to add?
No, thank you though.
Okay. Well, that is it. We are out a little bit early, so hopefully you can get outside and enjoy. Thank you all for participating. This was a really great discussion, and I'm very excited to go back and look through the notes and add this to the report. So thanks. Have a good day.